I am a history buff. I like all things history. And where Joe is living now in Northwest Florida is very close to Pensacola, Florida. And I think Joe told me off air about 65 miles. I've been to Pensacola. The Naval Museum there is absolutely amazing. Mobile, Alabama is not far. I've been to the USS Alabama. I love history, and the history of muskie fishing goes through Muskie Hunter magazine, and it also goes through my guest today, Joe Bucher. Thank you for joining us on 54 Minutes with a Legend.
Well, I appreciate the invite there, Glenn. And we talked off air even before we are live here that we have a lot of things in common, and of course muskie and music and fishing lures and all that's all good, and of course Northwest Florida as well. I spend my winters here, so in the winter I'm down here chasing redfish and speckled trout, and then as soon as the spring comes around, I'm back up there in northern Wisconsin where I've always been, and then I'll be chasing muskies and other game fish the rest of the season. But this time of the year when the snow's, I've shoveled enough snow, Glenn.
Yes, you did. And I seen that. And it's interesting you say that because my wife's aunt lives in Mobile, Alabama, and they were making snowmen down there. So you weren't without getting a little touch of winter. And at least for you, you're probably used to that. And that's a little bit normal for you. But
that's a record. That was a record of all sorts. I include, I saw Governor DeSantis even say that, he's been here his whole life, never seen anything like it. They were shut down here for that snow held on the ground for 3 days. I can't believe it. I came down here to get away from the snow, but there was snow.
So the year we went down there in 2017, I believe it was, we brought the cold weather with us down there. We flew into New Orleans and it was like only +5 Celsius. So like upper 30s. It was cold for a better part of a week. And then a few days before we left, it got hot and humid and muggy. I did do some bass fishing up in the Tenshaw River up in Mobile, which was really fun. So that was something interesting for us that I'd like to do at some point in the future too. But tonight, it's all about muskies. We are going to touch on some music because Joe and I share a passion for music and guitar. So just going to warn you guys now towards the end of this, we're going to nerd out on some guitars and amps just a little bit because there's a funny thing with a lot of muskie fishermen. They're into music and a lot of them play guitar or drums or any kind of musical instrument. And another weird one is a lot of guys that I talk to are goaltenders. I was a goaltender in hockey as well. So it's just some weird things that you pick up on. But I do want to start with you and your history with Muskie Hunter magazine, because I think, like I said in the intro, the history of muskie fishing in its current form goes through Muskie Hunter magazine. And when I had Jim Sarek on a couple weeks ago, we talked about it quite a bit, at least his tenure there. And I do think that you are a huge part of what formed modern muskie fishing. So what's your story on that history, the early history of Muskie Hunter, Joe?
Well, it's great that you brought that up, and I'm glad that you did, because the whole Muskie Hunter magazine thing, my idea for Muskie Hunter magazine actually occurred over a decade or more before it actually ever came to be, and it was an idea that I had. Actually had the idea originally. This is like in the early '80s, might even been the late '70s, to have not only a fishing lure company but a muskie TV show, a muskie magazine, and muskie sports shows, all of which now exist. And Muskie Hunter magazine actually spawned at a sports show in eastern Wisconsin, right after one of my fishing seminars, doing a fishing seminar on muskies, which, by the way, in those days was not as prevalent, and there was no such thing as a muskie sports show or retail sports show, nor a full-fledged muskie television show. But anyways, over a couple of beers, like so many, ideas kind of spawn. I was sitting with the sports show promoters, and I said, I really think the timing is good for a muskie specific magazine. Prior to that, I don't know if you know my history with writing for Fishing Facts magazine all the way back into the early 70s. In Fisherman and Fishing Facts, and then I wrote a couple books. But when you write for a general fishing magazine, you might get a musky article, you might not. And even when I would write articles for those magazines, I even had trouble getting them published because muskies on the level when you compare them to largemouths and panfish and everything else and walleyes, they're down the ladder quite a bit in terms of interest. So it was always kind of a challenge in that respect. But I thought if I started my own magazine and then I collected all these musky anglers from all over North America under one roof, so to speak, we could feature muskies, we could advertise musky guide services and lures and all that kind of stuff. And that's how it formed. And over a couple of beers with a couple of guys in Green Bay, Wisconsin, Packerland, we started Musky Hunter magazine. And that's how, when you talk about Jim Sarek and Steve Heiting and Pete Main and some of these other guys, I took all those guys and brought them in with me to be writers of the magazine.
Let me ask one question there. I don't want to interrupt, but I just want to get a time frame on that. What was the time frame on when you were thinking of those ideas and when it started to come to fruition? Because I think that's interesting as well.
Well, like I said, the whole idea was this package of magazine, television show, lure company, musky sports shows. That all happened late 70s, early 80s, quite a long time before it actually ever spawned. And then the first thing that spawned was the magazine. And then there was my television show, and then the lure company. The lure company was in there somewhere, and that was around the early to mid 80s. And like I said, I would find these fellas from all over the country, all over the continent, that wrote about, that talked about muskies, that had a guide service or had a lure company, or were somehow biologists. Anybody was connected to muskies, and I tried to bring them into the fold to write for Musky Hunter magazine. And then also, it was the only venue to really advertise their products and their guide service and everything else that had to do with muskies. And that's how it started. And you mentioned Jim Sarek, you mentioned Steve Heiting. Those guys all became, some of those guys were guide clients of mine back when I was a full-time guide, which was also part of that deal at that time. But then they became instructors in my musky schools. I forgot to mention that. We also had musky schools at that point, and which were on the water schools. That also had instruction. The whole concept of Musky Hunter magazine, when I came up with it, was education. Getting all of these musky anglers all over North America, together. My whole concept was not, the whole focus was not to be some magazine that just featured me or just featured somebody else or just my lures or whatever. It was to create an industry of sorts, which now, it happened. All those things happened. But honestly, it all spawned, from some ideas. And, like so many ideas, Glenn, some of them become, like we're talking about, guitar. A good song sometimes starts with just a riff, and sometimes it takes a long time for that to actually, spawn into something real. And even a lure, our whole lure company kind of started by accident. Now I was using other people's lures, and a lure, I was modifying a spinner that got all busted up by musky, cutting and bending and doing all this stuff. And it was laying in the bottom of the boat. And a friend of mine even came up with the name. I never even came up with the name. She said, "Give me one of those Bucher tails." And I thought, that'd be a cool name for a lure, and that's how the first lure became to be. But it really wasn't marketed. It was just kind of a funny thing that he mentioned in the boat. And he caught a fish on that lure that day. Back in those days, we kept the majority of our fish. So that fish ended up, in photos and in a freezer in town or whatever. And the guy said, what did he catch it on? And he said, I caught it on one of those Bucher tails. And the guy said, well, can you make any of those for me? And that's how the lure company started. So, that's kind of how things sometimes, I look back at some of these things and go, how did this all happen? Sometimes I really don't have a clean answer. It was an incident or was this all meant to be? It happened, and so Musky Hunter moving forward, eventually I wanted to get away from being the editor of the magazine because one could argue that was a conflict of interest, that some people in the industry didn't want to get involved in the industry because they thought it was my magazine, and that, because I had a lure company and whatever, that I would be promoting my stuff too much. So I really wanted to get away from that. And so, I ended up involving other people in it. And actually, it was originally bought by a guy named Tom Petrie from me. And I was still very much involved as a writer, and Jim was still involved in the writing. And Jim bought the magazine from Tom Petrie. I always, by the way, when I didn't want to be an editor, I never wanted to be an editor of a magazine. I always wanted Steve Heiting as the editor of the magazine, because Steve was the editor of a magazine, in a regional magazine in our area called Wisconsin Sportsman. And Steve is a trained journalist. He's a college educated journalist and perfect guy for the job. And in fact, my original connection with Jim Sarek was through guiding. I guided him and his dad, and Jim caught his first 50 with me. Steve Heiting, my first connection with Steve Heiting, he was a newspaper editor and came over to fish with me and write a story about my night fishing thing. And so, these guys ended up coming into the fold and became, well-known musky anglers over time. And, I don't know how the rest is history.
That's so interesting. There's a couple things I want to unpack there. And I can't help but smile that those kind of stories and that history lesson, that's what I really like. I love hearing the history. And when you got this going, Joe, and just to touch on the not wanting to be the editor, I understand that. No way or shape would I ever compare what I do at 54 or Bust with what you did with Musky Hunter. But I think a lot of people will appreciate this, that when we started this, and it's a group effort between my buddy Dave and my wife, and then my brother-in-law and my sister-in-law, like we kind of do it together. I may be the face of it or the editor, for lack of a better term, but it's a group effort. Stuff like this doesn't happen on its own. So I can see your need to step away from being the figurehead or being the one, so it's not called, the Joe magazine, but it's still, there needs to be that figurehead there. So I don't think that it's totally fair to say that, people just thought it was all about you. But just to take that a step further, when you got this going and you were like bringing those guys in, how reluctant were they? And as a broader sense in that time frame, Joe, like today, musky fishing is a niche market inside of fishing. What was it like then? It had to be niche beyond niche to even have a group of like diehard musky guys that enough that you thought this would work. Like, what was that dynamic working with those guys and convincing them that you had something that you thought could really work?
I'll tell you, it's what's really interesting is that just speaking of the magazine in particular, I think most of the guys, especially guides, were totally dialed. They wanted to be involved because it would promote their guide business. And my whole offer to them is, can't pay you a lot yet. I says, but we can promote your guide business, and you'll get guide business from this, and which they did. And my biggest struggle in the beginning was getting other manufacturers involved, because they thought it would be too partial towards my lures. So resorts and all that kind of stuff wanted to advertise in the magazine, but some of the early muskie manufacturers were a little reluctant. And when my hunch there was right, because as soon as I backed away from being the editor, most of those industry people got involved. So I knew I had to do that. But I wanted to get it started. I wanted to get it started, and that worked. And I look back on those days now and say, I'm glad that we did what we did. And at the same time, as you know now, what's happened with technology, what we're doing right here, the whole world has changed. Back when I started the magazine, for example, think about this. First of all, there was no such thing as a musky sports show.
Mm-hmm.
When you went into a retail store, I mean, even the hardcore musky areas, Lake of the Woods and Eagle Lake and northern Wisconsin, and you would have a little section of musky tackle. You would have just a handful of manufacturers. You'd have one or two rods. It was still, when I first started, it was the 5.5 foot pool cue. That was the 5 foot pool cue era. And there wasn't all these selections of rods and braid, super braids and a musky sports shop. Think about that. I mean, you have, the musky shop, and places like that. Now, just have musky tackle, and that's all they have in the store. That wasn't possible. That wasn't. So, I would have to say that I am most proud of creating, because I created the magazine and started it. It kind of like powder kegged, it's just a big snowball that got all this interest going. And then, by the way, all these, we also had muskie clinics from all that, the Musky Hunter magazine clinics and sport and in schools and stuff, where you could go to a sports show or go to a clinic and see the whole group of guys out there doing musky stuff all day long, and which also brought more and more and more people into the sport. And so we grew the sport by doing that. And of course, because we grew the sport by doing that, we grew the retail side of the business by doing that. Yes. So that's kind of what happened, and over time, I look back at it now, Glenn, I look back and you go, wow, having an idea like that, it spawned a whole bunch of things, and again, those 4 or 5 ideas all came to be, TV show, sports shows, magazine, fishing lure companies all over the place. And now we have, YouTube videos and who knows what'll be next. You have a selection of rods in the boat that rivals anything in any sport now. And the sport has grown probably by at least 5 times what it was when I started.
Yeah, let me jump in there, because I think there's a bit of a disconnect from people that have gotten into the sport, especially through COVID, post COVID, versus, and I think I mentioned this with Jim, even prior to COVID, you didn't see as many YouTube channels, you didn't see as much on social media. You still had Musky Hunter magazine up until 2018. It was still kind of that authority. Yeah, there was some stuff online, and the sports shows and stuff were really popular, but I think there's this feeling of today's musky angler that come in within the last 5 to 8 years, that they don't either remember the history, or even that 2000 to early 2010s history of musky fishing. And you're right, it was a lot different than it is now. I look forward to getting the Musky Hunter magazine in the mail and seeing what was in there, because that was the Bible of musky fishing every month or every couple months. What, from your perspective, Joe, as Jim took over the magazine and you guys started to get into the 2010s, where did you start to see some of those changes, and the change or the shift in mindset from needing that magazine, needing one-on-one conversations at a sports show to the drift to kind of social media, because you certainly adopted social media. I've watched almost every video you've ever put out on every platform, and I'm sure all my viewers have too. So what was that change like, or how did you see that change from your perspective?
Well, I think really, I'm sure that most of the folks listening to us here today will agree with me that we're just kind of seeing it develop, and it's changing every day. You just think about it beyond Musky Hunter. Think about how important getting that magazine for older people, how important getting that magazine was, or that newspaper. How important the newspaper was to us, to me when I was younger, to my parents, watching network television, which less than 30% of today's audience watches network television. I don't know what the percentage is of people that actually read magazines there anymore. The younger audience today is getting everything on their cell phones and their pads and stuff like that. And they're watching news in a different format. It's all digital. So the world is changing, and it's changing. It's changing every year. Technology is jumping leaps and bounds. Who knows where this AI stuff is gonna go? And then you add into it the technology with sophisticated sonar equipment and GPS and all this other stuff that did not exist through the pages of Musky Hunter. You got to understand, and I know there's quite a few of these folks here that are listening today that'll appreciate this too. It's like, when I started, it was the green box. That was the locator.
My father-in-law has one
Yeah,
of actually a couple of the really original ones.
yeah. But that's how far back this goes. And when I started musky fishing before Musky Hunter, there wasn't any catch and release. So that catch and release thing, which is so prevalent today. And let's face it, I don't know, does anybody actually ever keep a muskie anymore? I don't know. Maybe if one dies by, I haven't talked to even my buddies who are taxidermists to know if anybody actually ever keeps one anymore. But that wasn't the case back then. So the sport in general has changed. The media that we get our information from has completely changed. And I guess the magazine today would really struggle in a print format to survive, because outside the musky industry, all of these folks that are in the just in the print business are struggling.
Yeah.
From the New York Times to the local newspaper. It's from on television to people aren't watching ABC and Fox and NBC and CBS like they were growing up. They are not. It's just a whole different ballgame today. And it's the same thing. Now, are muskies still the same? Essentially, yes. Do a lot of the things that, even when I'm down here in Florida, I just use the knowledge that I've attained over my lifetime as a fisherman, as an angler, and apply it to whatever I fish for. And it works, and there's always a learning curve. But hey, think about this. The figure eight, which is, long rods and braided line and the figure eight and all this stuff, which is such a, it's like, it's like peanut butter and jelly. It's like, that's all what you do if you're going to cast. Think about this. When I started Musky Hunter, nobody catching fish on figure eights hardly at all. So, the tackle wasn't as good for it. But the whole premise of Musky Hunter magazine was education. Entertainment, yes. A format for folks to advertise their livelihoods and their products and share their ideas with other musky anglers and growing this business together. But as all happens, when you get all of these people involved, you get all these ideas. We all start to grow as anglers, and then we teach another generation how to do it, and then they take it another step. And it's exciting to watch it today and go, wow, there's a lot of really good anglers out there today that really got some great skills. And but they get to start at a different level than we did.
I think that's pretty key. And I see it up on Eagle Lake when we see a younger angler come up here, whether he's using the new technology or just using a GPS or a map that maybe his father or uncle drew up for that section of the lake. Guys are coming up here and their learning curve is just so narrow now. They're great anglers, like they're really good musky anglers. They come to a new area and they can pick these spots apart so quickly and have such success. But yet other people come up here and really struggle. So there's a I think there's a wide divide between the average musky angler, like your bona fide weekend angler, and then the people that are what we would consider like really solid, good musky anglers. And I think that's always been the case, Joe, because I got to think that back in the 70s and 80s when, when you guys were building this sport up, you and the cast of characters that you've been mentioning, that within that, some of the best anglers are probably some of your friends that have never been in the public. And I think there's some of those today too. And you're going to have that in any sport. But just looking at as you guys built that magazine up, when did you start to make that transition to video? Because I think there's such a cool history there. And for what it is I do on YouTube and social media, and a lot of the other guys, we owe a lot of respect to guys like you, Jim, Pete Mena, even going back to somebody like Bob Messicomer, who used to come up here in my neck of the woods and catch a lot of fish on cedar. You guys were filming at a time when nobody was really doing that. And that was a lot of my earliest memories of musky videos was through guys like you. When did that start?
The filming thing or going to the digital stuff?
Well, the filming first, like
yeah,
when
the
you
filming stuff,
guys.
Sure. The filming thing for me, you know, many of the people that are listening, I don't know if they know that, but before all this, I made a living as a full-time guide. So that's really kind of where I started. But back in the early 70s, you're going to make a living as a guide. By the way, gas was $29.9 in those days. And I had a 35 horse tiller on the back of my little 16-foot Lund. It was a little duck boat colored Lund, and at 35, gas was like I remember I was $35 a day, and when I went to $50 a day, it was called expensive. But anyways, back in those days, in the early 70s, you couldn't make a living as a guide, at least where I was at, as a musky angler. So I would guide for walleyes, and then talk my guests after we'd fill out on walleyes. I'd talk them into little musky fishing. Well, along the way, my reputation built as a guide, and eventually I was guiding and guesting on some folks that had television shows before mine. I took the Lindners out and Roland Martin and Babe and a bunch of these different guys out, and some names that are less familiar to a lot of our viewers. But those guys I was their guide when they fished in our area. And I remember fishing with Roland Martin. I mean, Roland Martin is the guy who talked me into doing my own show. I'm fishing with Roland Martin on filming, and that's when it was just broadcast TV. There was none of this stuff. Mm-hmm. Roland Martin had a broadcast show on a big network back in those days. I think it was called TNN, probably before your time, but TNN was like the Tennessee Nashville network, and fishing with Roland Martin, the great American fisherman, in his soul, and Roland came into town to do a show with me, and we ended up doing like 6 shows. And, after about 2 days, and Roland's hanging around, more time than he wanted to. And he said, son, everything was son with Roland. He says, son, he said, you ought to have your own TV show. You got so much good water up here. You could be filming all kinds of different things. You ought to have your own TV show. And that's how it started. And, I was really taught how to operate in the television world and, how to get it started from Roland Martin. I give him all the credit for getting me started. And then it wasn't easy, but that I started in television, back in mid '90s, early '90s, doing television, and my it grew from being a local broadcast television show to a regional television show, and then it became a national television show on networks like the Sportsman's Channel and the Outdoor Channel and World Fishing Network, and then I was on the air over 30 years, 31 years. But all this time, then all this time, Glenn, this new digital market is starting to occur, is starting to develop, and so what happened too is advertising dollars got harder to get. Costs a lot of money to do broadcast TV on big networks, big networks. So my overhead with those broadcast TV shows was gigantic. Hundreds of thousands of dollars to operate a television show every year. Pretty scary stuff. Sometimes you keep you awake at night. Kind of those are kind of costs are involved. And long and short of it was eventually started to struggle for big ad dollar money, and at the same time our audience on those shows on those networks was shrinking, but this other product was spawning up, this YouTube thing, and so started taking my shows and uploading them to YouTube, and eventually the whole network thing just became like non-existent, and I retired out of it and started to just produce a digital product, and then it became a whole different product when it became digital. It's a short format where the network show was a 30-minute show, very much like the shows are on any television network still today, with ads, spaced at a certain time, and then the next show would come on, and you watch my show every Saturday morning, or Sunday morning, or sometimes it'd be a replay in midweek, and or if you didn't have and you had a DVR, or if you plugged in your VHS recorder, you'd have a copy of my show. But that's how it started. Eventually, the media changed, just like Musky Hunter magazine. The media, the newsprint thing changed and became, people weren't buying newsprint and they're getting stuff digital. And the same thing happened with television. And eventually, this is the product right here. And then, even when you talk about social media and everything, when you hang around young guys, I've got grandson and grandson who are very, and even a great grandson. That's how long I've been around, Glenn. They keep me up to speed on things, and they taught me a lot. And Grandpa, you need to do this, and Grandpa, you need to do that. Grandpa, you need to be on Facebook. Grandpa, you need to be on Instagram. Have you talked to my friend Chaz Martin yet?
We've chatted kind of off air, and he was at the Milwaukee show, but I didn't actually run into him on Saturday. I seen him on Friday, but we've talked off air, and I think at some point we will do something together, because he is a subject I want to kind of talk to you about. So we'll circle back to him.
Well, he's another one of those proteges that, like Sarek and all these other guys, that just kind of, Chaz Martin walk up to me at sports shows, and when he's just a little guy, and wanted to learn how to musky fish, and now he's got himself a great little show, and he's kind of he's doing a great job. But it's one of those things that he says, dude, you need to do this, you need GoPros, you need this, you need that, and I guess the other thing too is, no matter how much you learn, whether you're talking about fishing and musky fishing, whatever, there's still more to learn, and we learn from each other. And I want you and all of the folks listening to your show and watching your show here to know that you got to put your ego aside, especially in sports, musky fishing, all that stuff. You get humbled more often than you care to admit, and we all can keep learning. And even when I was inducted into the Hall of, the National Freshwater Fishing Hall of Fame, back in the early 2000s, I look back in those days, and I was supposed to be, an elite angler. That's how I got in there, right? I look back and go, man, I thought I really knew something when I was inducted into the Hall of Fame. I look back on that now, 25 years after being inducted, and go, man, I didn't know much. And as I move into my 70s now, I look back at my career and go, boy, there's still a lot to learn, and there's still a lot of, and I still enjoy the sport just as much. And I guess what reason I mentioned Chaz Martin is that I thoroughly enjoy, having conversations with younger guys like you and like Chaz and that, and I appreciate you guys wanting to know the history of the sport, and what I did in as part of that history. But it's like anything else. Somebody takes the ball and runs with it. So it's time for somebody else to take the ball and run with it. And I'm all about helping folks get involved in the sport, and watching them grow, and helping grow the sport.
Yeah, I just want to shout out my buddy Dirk here. He's watching over in Belgium right now, and I know it's probably pretty early in the morning for him. And he said this was one thing that he didn't want to miss. And he was saying that your Crankbait Secrets book is popular over there, and I'm gonna have Dirk on at some point because they fish for those big northerns over there, and I love that aspect that those big northerns are so much like our muskies. So that's just something interesting that we get this audience from all over the place. And when I think of you getting guys like Chaz in and being kind of like your protege, I think it's important for people to remember that when you, Jim, Steve, Pete, Herbie, the guys that are one musky generation before me, at least, you guys laid that foundation for a lot of us now. And especially as you're talking about the switch over to digital, I just, for myself, and I'll only speak for myself here, I have to pay a huge, debt of respect to what you guys did before us, because there wouldn't be a lot of musky content, not to the caliber that some of it is today, without what you guys have did. And I do think that there's a lot of this younger generation that, you're right, there's a lot of ego in this sport. And anytime you're hunting apex predators, whether it's in hunting or fishing, there's that little bit of chest pumping there. It's going to be part of the sport. It's how you handle it. And
Yep.
it does dictate a lot of your character on how you handle stuff like that. But I do think that you have to pay respect to those that came before you. And that's something that unfortunately I don't see a lot of in today's muskie industry. It's me, me, me.
Yeah.
And I, for what I can do at 54 bust, I want this sport to be more inclusive and have more people come in. And I do think it's important to celebrate a 38-inch fish just as much as we celebrate a 52. That's been kind of our mission statement. And I think in today's world that gets lost a little bit. And I think what you guys did on a whole with Muskie Hunter, yeah, you're going to celebrate the big catches, but you celebrated the fish. And I think that was important. Was that something that you guys thought of when you were writing the magazine and publishing it, that you needed to cover all those
Absolutely.
kind of bases?
That was, being the editor or the leader of the whole magazine when it started, was all about, yeah. I mean, you're going to have people at all levels reading the magazine. You're going to have people at all these different levels coming into the sport. I guess the way I even looked at when I spoke at a sports show, for example, even when I still do, I try not to talk down to people, number one. And number two, I always look out at a crowd and go, the handful of guys out there that are really good probably aren't going to listen to me much anyway. They think they're at that level. They might be, you know what I'm saying? But they might be at that level, or more, whatever. But I want to make sure that I always take care of that person that's frustrated, or he's just about there, or she's just about there, but just needs a tweak. And that's what goes back to the educational side. If you watch my videos today, even the newer ones I put up, they are 80% education.
Mm-hmm.
It's teach somebody how to catch them. My whole philosophy, by the way, even when early days of guiding, and it was the same philosophy I had with musky hunters. Like, if I teach you, it's like, guy come in with I'd have two different clients. One client, save his money to be able to fish with me. Client over here could book me for a week and whatever. He had he had more money. But what's interesting is that the guy, once in a while, I'd run into that person and go, well, so if I pay you more, will I get a bigger fish? If I, can you guarantee me fish? And one of my biggest pet peeves with those people is, can you guarantee me you can catch it?
Yeah.
I can put you over, I have the knowledge of the water, but you have the skills to actually catch this fish. So if I teach you how to do this, this is where I'm going with this. If I take the time to teach you how to become a better angler, well, you're going to make me look good anyway, right? And it's the same thing when you're reading a magazine. If you're reading an article about, or watching somebody's video, and you're seeing, whoever it is catching fish and catching fish and catching fish, or you're reading a story about some guy catching fish and bragging about how many big fish he catches, but you never learn anything. With some of these videos, they don't even show you what they're using or whatever. So what have you gained other than a small entertainment value out of that whole experience? But if you show them how to do it, so that they can experience it, then they get, they buy into the whole concept. And, you think about Musky Hunter, getting people to subscribe year after year after year, getting people to hire a guide again and again and again, getting people to buy one of my lures. All the lures that I ever designed, they're tools. I looked at all my lures as like, they're tools in the toolbox. You're fishing in heavy cover, you need a spinnerbait or a spoon. And it goes, step by step by step. They're a screwdriver, they're a pliers, they're a hammer. If I need to go, the 8 to 12 foot break line, I need a depth radar. And I need to fish it a certain way. Trolling, you're talking about trolling. Understanding the concepts of trolling and what line length and speed and all these different things do to your line diameter, what they do to your trolling depth. Again, education. So, I get excited talking about it, as you can see, but I like to teach people how to do something and teach them how to fish. You teach it. You take a friend out, even when I'm down here fishing these big saltwater fish. You teach them how to do it, and then they're going to have success, and then they're going to buy into doing it again and again.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And when we started our channel here on YouTube, it was easy to go out and film the catches, talk a little bit about it. We caught it on a slot master, whatever the case might be. But there's just not a lot of value in there. And I found for myself when I watched videos, I needed to learn something. The Catch Fest, I think, as a whole on YouTube, that segment of the entertainment value of it is kind of dying out. You need to do more with it. So we transitioned into doing some wakeboard stuff. We didn't invent that. Jordan Weeks has been doing that for years with Musky Hunter magazine and what he does. And all through sports, there's been wakeboard stuff. We just took it a different view on it, talked about each spot that we caught. And that's all I could do, is show people what it was we were doing. And a lot of the people that are watching tonight find a lot of value in that. And I'm sure when they watch your videos, they found a lot of value in what you were teaching. And I always found it very interesting in the way that, especially the later years of you doing the digital version of your catches, the catch was really a small part of it. You talked a lot about it, and I'll be honest, what we do on our channel comes from stuff exactly like you do. Some points we're in the boat, we get the fish in the net, and I'm like, okay, let's go back to the shop and talk about this catch. We'll come back and have a look in the boat. And that's that mindset of even though you're filming in the boat, you're thinking, how am I going to use this footage? And that comes straight from you, Joe. I mean, watching stuff that you've done, you've influenced so many of us. And does that come super easy to you when you were in the boat, or did you have to kind of think about it at first to get into that mindset?
Well, you kind of made my day talking about that. That's made a difference for you, and that's like a double thumbs up for me. And we talked briefly, for example, about Chaz Martin. You watch Chaz Martin's show, Musky Mastery, and I mean, the dude started with me, so he started as a camera guy, and then then I got him on camera to be, and he's a great talent on camera. But you watch Chaz, and he's a teacher, by the way. But
You can certainly
yeah,
tell he's a
and
teacher.
but you look at the dude's show, and he's teaching. He's teaching his audience. And what the other thing is about. Well, to answer your question, by the way, I mean, again, it's my philosophy. If I show you how to do it, and you have success with it, the best letters I get, I never get tired of getting a letter, a comment that says, I tried this and it worked. I tried, not only I tried your lure and it worked, but more so I tried what you talked about. It worked. And you can, if you don't do that, your message gets old, because there is no message. It's all about entertainment. So if you teach people how to do something, and there was a time, and there's still a lot of anglers like this, that we don't want to talk, we don't want to tell the secrets and all this kind of stuff, and to a certain extent I get it, but think about it, and I know that, I know you've experienced this, and I bet you a lot of our listeners have too, is that, man, you can take a horse to water, but you can't force them to drink. If they don't grasp what you're telling them, they're still not going to be successful. They don't take what you're saying seriously, they're not going to be overly successful. If somebody takes what you're telling them and learns from it and really takes it to heart, the byproduct, I don't know if you've ever heard I have this three-pronged theory, the Bucher's theory of success. It's knowledge plus skills plus effort. Those three, add them together, the byproduct is success. Okay, take away one of those three. Okay, take away the knowledge or take away the skills. You can have all kinds. There was a time when everybody thought that musky fishing was all about effort. If it's all about effort, then it still becomes the fish of 10,000 casts. Okay, think about that. It's still the fish of 10,000 casts if that's all it is effort. Add skills to that. Now it's the fish of 1,000 casts. And I'm just being hypothetical here. You add knowledge of water, knowledge of the lures, knowledge of the conditions and everything. You put those all together, knowledge, skills, and effort. You're going to have a high degree of success. And you see that on a football field. You see that in the water when you're fishing. You can relate it to my saltwater fishing down here. I'm catching a lot more of these big bull reds down here than I ever caught before, because I know more. Yeah. I know what it takes to catch them. When you have a body of water that you know well, and you're skilled at the lures that and the whatever it is, trolling or casting, that you're skilled at that, and then you put a lot of effort into it, you're going to have success. And you can apply that three-pronged principle to just about anything in life, and it works. And you take away one of those and you'll struggle. Take away two of those and then you really struggle.
I want to touch on that because there is a mindset in modern musky fishing, and especially, I don't want to bring up forward-facing sonar, but I want I just want to say that the people that are against it, they embrace this grind that somehow they are better anglers, or they're better suited, or they're owed that catch because they put this grind in. And we've called some of our videos the grind of Eagle Lake, and we grinded it out for a day and we caught a 48-inch fish. It's not a grind. You When you look at some of the old school grinds and you hear Herbie talk about not seeing a fish for 12 days, that is a
Right.
grind. And in today's world, we don't grind like that. That just doesn't happen. And for Dave and I, we we pick our time on the water where we think we're going to have the best success, because we have the knowledge of the local water. We have, the skill set that helps us achieve on the local water. And, we can put those things together and not have to go out there and grind for 2 or 3 days to catch one fish. Last summer was a grind because the fishing was tougher. And I think in today's musky fishing, we as anglers expect success so quickly. We expect it to just happen because we have the best of everything. And it shouldn't be easy, but it still shouldn't be this sport where you have to measure how good you are by how hard you had to grind out to catch a fish. So I think it's interesting that you see it kind of from that perspective as well. And while I do want to transition away from some of the history stuff, but I do see my buddy here, Ed, asked, who was the inspiration for you, Joe, in your early musky fishing? Because I just think, again, just to cover that history is very, very key.
I think there was no individual that was really inspirational, because, I mean, when I first got into it, there just wasn't many guys doing stuff. There was, I collected just about every musky book that everybody that got into it like I did back in the day. But those were stories, and those weren't. There were guides that were older than me that they were inspirational to me, but most of them weren't musky guys. I mentioned Roland Martin, Al Lindner, Spence Petros, great, became a great personal friend of mine. And, he's been on, yeah, as you know, a lot of videos with me.
Yep.
And Spence, I don't know if you know the story, but Spence was the editor of Fishing Facts magazine way back in the day, and talked me into writing. So when I was a teenager, Spence spoke at a sports, or at a fishing club where I was at, and saw the big fish I was catching, and said, "You ever think about writing? And you ought to write an article for me in Fishing Facts." And that's when I wrote my first article when I was 19 years old for Fishing Facts, and that's kind of how that whole thing got going. But guys like Spence, he was an inspiration to me. But Buck Perry, not even a musky fisherman, but Buck Perry, and some of the early bass fishermen, that when I was growing up and before I was a muskie guy, those guys were big inspirations to me. The biggest inspiration for me with muskies was the fish itself, and that would be the most honest answer to your viewers watching this. And I saw one of the questions there. It's like, yeah, I mean, it's the fish itself. I remember one of my first encounters with muskies was like, bringing in a different fish, bringing in a walleye and having a muskie come up and grab a hold of it and rip it off your line is like, whoa, or, back in the day, the first really big one you see come in, you're just like, man, that's an inspiration. That's an inspiration. There's been those moments too where you see one of those really rare fish that's much bigger than all the other ones that you've ever caught or seen, that really gives you inspiration that, whoa, so something like this really does exist out there. Seeing an upper 50-inch, 60-inch class fish is like, that's a big inspiration for me. So that would be, in answering that question, I mean, the best answer to that is the fish itself was the biggest inspiration, and then learning how to catch it, which became like this lifelong challenge to do more than just cast a bucktail for 10,000 casts.
Yeah. And for me, when we always fished as kids with my parents, but it was always walleye fishing up here in northwestern Ontario. I don't remember the first muskie I ever caught. It would have been just an incidental catch walleye fishing, probably on Corner Lake, which is anybody that's been up here. Herbie used to fish it for years for muskies. The first couple times I ever went for muskies, I remember one of my first bigger fish was like 44, and it was just like, wow, this is amazing. And as I got into the sport, my figure eights were horrible. I met my wife.
Oh,
Now we all start there, right? And I met my wife Kyla, and her dad and her two brothers Ryan and Jeff were very accomplished muskie anglers. They're a family friends of Pete Mayna's, fished with Pete, and I was fishing with my brother-in-law Jeff, and we had a really nice fish come up to the boat. I just horsed the figure eight, and Jeff's like, "Were you trying to catch that fish or not?" And I thought he was being mean to me, like just like shooting me down. And then later that day, I watched him pull like the perfect figure eight on a 48-inch fish with a bucktail and totally nailed it. And I learned so much in the 8 seconds of that figure eight, and it stuck with me for a long time. And I tell people that when you're learning the figure eight, it takes so long to figure it out, but then something clicks and then you got it. And I do think that fishing with people that are better than you, like a guide, like an accomplished angler, you'll learn so much in those little minutes. And just watching the Canada US hockey game last night, my wife and I were talking about Sidney Crosby on the Canadian team, that he didn't do a lot with the puck, but sometimes there's a lot you can do away from the play. And I think in musky fishing, there's a lot that you can do where you cast, how you retrieve, how you maintain composure when a fish comes up and you don't get it. I just think that fishing with better people helps. Is that something that you would say helped you as well? And especially when you got that core group of the musky hunters together.
oh, absolutely. When you never stop learning. That was a great hockey game, by the way. That just, I mean, what that did for the sport is just unbelievable. Beyond the game, I
Yeah.
mean, the Canadians are totally into hockey anyway, but what that did for the game down here, in the States is like, I think they had viewership beyond anything they've ever witnessed. I think it might have been the most watched hockey game ever.
Yeah.
That's just amazing. But getting back to the sport and fishing, that goes right back to my three-pronged principle: skills.
Yeah.
When you watch a really skilled angler, no matter what they're fishing for, sometimes the best thing you can do, as advice to your listeners, sometimes the best thing you can do is just watch, and even from another boat, you will learn a lot sometimes by what you don't catch. And by looking around going, I didn't know there were fish up in there. I did. Wow. It even when the guy or gal's not in your boat, you can learn a lot from just being visual. I tell you, one of the best things I also, as far as advice goes, when I try to advise people on today, we're talking about this technology thing, is that one of the mistakes, or one of the things that can really hang people up today is becoming so dependent on electronics that they lose these natural skills. One of the advantages of my generation, one of the biggest advantages of my generation was having over time developed these skills from experience.
Yep.
Just being there, doing it, seeing it done so many times, and beyond that, being able to look around you and go, oh yeah, the wind's doing this, the clouds are doing that, the humidity's this, down here even watching tides and subtle weather changes, sun, big thing up here, by the way, this time of the year is solar, the time of the day when the sun finally cracks, it'll finally crack 60 degrees. When it hits 60 degrees here this time of the year, it's like magic. 30-degree nights and 30-degree mornings become 60-degree late in the afternoon. Same thing happens a lot of times with spring musky fishing. But all these being observant of the surroundings. I see a deer behind you, hunting. I'm a passionate whitetail bow hunter. Turkey hunting, same thing. But hunting skills really transcend well into the fishing side of things. And when you have a lot of water time, you have a lot of woods time, you develop these natural skills that you're not even aware of, that you recognize things that other people wouldn't recognize. And when you do that, man, Chaz used to say, Bucher's in that Zen moment. And I don't say that with, and I apologize if that seems, egotistical at all, but I've heard other people say that. And it's one of those things that it only happens over time. It's when an experienced quarterback that's in his, going in his late 30s, early 40s in the NFL, and you watch him go up the line, he has seen this so many times. He's seen that defense. He's seen the situation. He's going to react to it with some, you know what I mean? All I'm saying is anglers today will have a tendency, whether it's forward-facing sonar and you're just looking all the time with your head down, to just studying your bait or watching your sonar all the time and not looking. Just look what's in front of you. There's subtle things a lot of times, and whether it's even a fish swirl or bait fish.
Yep.
Bait fish in the shallows, stuff like that. You're like, don't discount those things. Those things are huge. Those things tip you off to the location of those predators and to active, and to success. And again, it's a three-pronged principle. It comes right back to the knowledge, skills, and effort.
Yep. I have to mention this because what you're saying is exactly my father-in-law, Harry. He's been a fishing guide on and off his whole life, and he reads shoreline. And David and I, when we're in the boat and we take him bass fishing in the spring, and he's constantly reading shoreline, and he's taught us so much from that. So if we have a bedrock shoreline and all of a sudden there's some broken rubble and you see a few boulders in the water, Harry's telling us, okay, guys, there's going to be like an underwater bar here. That's key. And now when Dave and I are out on a new body of water, and I want to transition here in a little bit over to Lake of the Woods because you have so much information there. But when Dave and I went down to fish Lake of the Woods for the Nestor Falls Muskie Cup the first couple times, we had never been out there. We had to read the shoreline, read the water. Yeah, we had electronics. I didn't have forward-facing sonar. So we're using everything at our fingertips, but a lot of it was visual. And we always went back to fishing with Harry. What would Harry see here? And a quick little anecdote on that. We were in, I think it was my wife's truck at the time, and we had some friends in the back seat. We were coming from Harbor Fest in Kenora, they have a bunch of bands in the summer at the pavilion in Kenora. And our buddy Ashley reaches in the back of the seat and he opens up this piece of paper, and it's a hand-drawn map. And Ashley's like, I don't know where this is, but this is a Harry map. He's like, this is important. Something's important on here. And whether it was for hunting or fishing, I do think the point I want to make is that you need to fish with guys that have that experience, because I think a lot of younger or newer or inexperienced anglers fish with a set group of guys, and you all fish very similar. And I feel very blessed that I've had as much time in the boat with Harry as I have, because it's opened us up to a side of musky fishing that I probably wouldn't have seen quite as easily.
One of the things that I do every once in a while, and in fact, I think Tyler Andrews, who connected
Yep.
the two, one spring, early summer, I had some boat issues that my buddies at Recon were working on for me. And so We fished out of Tyler's boat for over a month. Tyler didn't have a sonar on his boat yet. And, I said to Tyler, I says, this is going to be good. I said, I'm going to show you that we can catch fish the old school way, no sonar units, and we're going to still be really successful. And we're going to rely on, natural skills and doing it, kind of the old fashioned way. And I'm sure Tyler's probably listening, and I'm sure he's smiling right now, but we had a ton of success, no sonar unit. And we scored. I filmed a lot of TV stuff, with Tyler for that whole month, no sonar on the boat. And so one of those, what's really interesting about that, fly fishermen, fish in a stream, fish in a river or stream, there's no sonar. It's all here and here. It's all visual, and then the skill, the skills of placing the lure in the proper spot and understanding, but watching all the surroundings. So, not the worst idea in the world. It's just to shut everything down and fish sonarless, fish without electronics once in a while, and especially when you're fishing, spooky shallow water fish, and you'll find out that it improves your natural visual observant skills quite a bit.
That's a perfect transition into you on Lake of the Woods. And I just want to touch on the fact that when I talked to Jim, we talked about some of that shallower water fishing. And I've talked to John Mish off air, and I just ran into John at the Milwaukee show and talked to him about some of the shallow water fishing that him and Jim did up on Cedar Lake. And like, you're right in the back of those bays and you're hitting very specific spots within there. And that's something that I took away from a lot of your videos from Lake of the Woods, the back of that sandy bay with a little bit of pencil weeds. But it seems like you always knew where to cast. When you're learning spots like that and catching and then teaching, what's the mindset? Because for me, that always seemed to be one of the key spots, or at least when we went to Lake of the Woods, we were looking at it through your eyes. It felt like to us.
Oh, that's very flattering, but I can tell you this, and this is something that I've talked to, a young Jim Sarek, a young Chaz Martin, pretty much the same way. And this is just my philosophy is, after all the photos, the hoopla and the release and everything like that, analyze, go back, and even after you're off the water, while you're tipping that beer or your favorite beverage or whatever, and you're looking at the photos of your fish and whatever, the video, whatever, and you analyze, okay, analyze every possible thing you can so that you can duplicate your success. And this is something a lot of anglers don't do, and the few really good ones do, is that they go, wow, why was it's just asking questions. Okay, whether it's Lake of the Woods or anything else, is why was that big fish here today and not there any other time, that the other 25 times I fished this spot? What made that spot really good right now? And sometimes that answer is right in front of you, but if you write down a bunch of variables that you could recognize, wind direction, time of the day, moon phases. By the way, that's how I discovered the whole moon thing. Is reanalyzing it afterwards and going, wait a minute, there seems to be an awful lot of fish coming on moonrise and moonset, no matter which time of the day it occurs. But that was just one variable. But where I'm going with this is that the more you analyze these kind of things, they answer these subtle questions and improve your educational, your wisdom, your educational skills. And again, that's another skill, and it improves your knowledge base. And what'll happen down the road, and this is really important for your listeners to grasp, over time, you'll be out on a big body of water, for example, like Lake of the Woods, and all of a sudden you go, whoa, I recognize these conditions. I need to be on such and such spot. It might be a mile from me. It might be 3 miles from me. It might be just around the corner. But these conditions look really, really similar to when I caught that big one back in 2009. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And you go back there and you know what? Go back there and fish it the same way with the same baits. And more often than not, you score a touchdown. And if you score a touchdown again and again, now things start to click up here. And that's the way I read water. That's how I read water, no matter whether I'm fishing down here in Northwest Florida on the Gulf of America or the Choctawhatchee Bay down here. When I have success, I analyze it right there and then most of the time, but I also analyze it later. It's like, but what I do, by the way, too, is what I will do is take my phone. If I can grab my phone here and show you this, what I will do, it's real easy to do today. Let me pull up a big redfish here. I'll just pull up can you see that okay?
Yep.
Okay. What I'll do is pull that up here. Can you see all the notes underneath that?
Mm-hmm.
That's analyzing your success. So here's a big redfish. Okay. And this big redfish I caught, just replace that redfish with a muskie. It's the same principle. This big redfish, okay, that's the biggest redfish I ever caught in this spot in 5 years of fishing this spot. Why was that big redfish there that day? Okay, so now you look at this and go, okay, I was in a low tide, really extremely low tide, overcast rain, very windy, east wind. Ooh, that's a big one. Okay, east wind is always bad for fishing, but this big fish was in that spot in east wind. 70 degrees, strong tidal current. So there's all these notes appearing here that I took. I pulled this up and wrote this all down, and I do that with every muskie, every big fish I catch. And then I might add to that when I'm home after the fishing day. And as a writer, a video producer, but as a writer of books, talking about crankbait secrets and stuff, that gives you all the information you need to be a good writer. Gives you that just gives you a library of knowledge to become a better angler.
Yeah, I agree. And I may have told this story just recently, either with Jim or I spoke with Jeremy Smith here recently too. But last summer on Cedar Lake, we went and visited our friends, Wade and Tracy, which own Cedar Lake Lodge, which used to be Al Rempel's camp. I'm not sure if you ever were up there where Jim fished, but we were there and everybody in camp was having a terrible week. Fish were just very negative. Dave and I went in, we knew we were going to have a moon event, and we just, because of the past experience on that lake, time of year, moon phase, we thought we were going to have this deep water bite just suspended off of structure that's not adjacent to shoreline. And first spot, we picked up a 48, picked up a 44 a little bit later, and then Dave got a 37 on a Suic way off a structure. And when I take my notes and I look back at my video, it almost fell right in line with what we thought we were going to see because of that knowledge. And I think for viewers, and especially for people coming up to Shield Lakes for a week, you have to learn quickly if you only have a week, but you have to, like you've been saying here, Joe, read everything around you and make quick decisions, but don't get stuck on a pattern that's not working for too long. How do you read that when you come up to Lake of the Woods, if you're using your knowledge and your past experience and it's like, ooh, this is telling me I should do this, but something's different in the environment. I have to make a pivot. How do you approach that?
Well, I tell you, that answer isn't always easy, and it's some of it's a gut feeling with that's relying on past experiences, to go to kind of lead you, and then it's I think one of the biggest things that we all experience is when we're not having success, that's also a big teacher. And that's hard for some folks to grasp. Um, the sport and the hunt of muskies. That's why we called it muskie hunter, by the way, because it is,
It
right?
is hunting
Yeah,
for sure. It
yeah,
is
yeah,
absolutely.
yeah. Hunting big whitetails. Hunting big trophy whitetails. It's like, why was that buck there that one day and he's not there any other day? You sometimes you learn the most when you're most frustrated, when you're really struggling and you're down in the dumps and you're trying all these different things and sometimes here's the other thing too. Sometimes it's nothing more than attrition, and you're talking about the grind. You know, sometimes windows are so small. Success is you're cast away from success. You just don't know where that you don't know where that cast is going to be, right?
Yep.
So you got to do everything right because your window of success on a tough bite is often small. And when you're having one of those days or weeks or whatever where it's really a struggle, um, one of the things I always do on when I do run into a real tough bite like that is, okay, what have I done in the past that's worked? One. Two, the success I have had, what was I doing? That's where taking good notes, showing that photo of that redfish, but Musky's the same way. Referring to past experiences and part of it also is you got to take some chances. It's like anything else. Sometimes like in any football game or hockey game, whatever it is, that play isn't working. So let's try something else. One of the things I've done with the big waters, by the way, like Lake of the Woods, is I'll just go, you know what? I'm having a tough bite here. I'm just going to pull out and for a couple of days here while the bite's tough, I'm just going to learn a bunch of water.
Yeah.
I'm going to run around and just learn, mark a bunch of spots, enjoy the surroundings, enjoy the learning part of, learning where all these reefs are and travel routes and stuff so I can get around. And then at the same time, I'm expanding my knowledge base of where to go, how to get there. And more often than not, when I'm doing that, I score one here. I score, maybe just once, but sometimes I score multiple times doing that and go, oh, And one of the things I've also done, and that has really worked well for me, is when I'm scoring on these big bodies of water, more often than not, there's not just one there. That area has a wolf pack of fish nearby. So if I find a muskie, on this point, I'm going to fish, the reefs and the points that are all within easy driving distance. I'm going to thoroughly fish this for a couple hours and see if I can score again. And then if I do score again, it's like, okay, I'm fishing everything here because there's a group of fish working this section of Lake of the Woods. And so sometimes running and learning new water, at the very least, you learn you're learning new things. And that is bound to pay. I've always looked at it this way too. That's bound to pay off later.
Yeah.
Right.
That's almost like putting a muskie in the bank.
Yes.
Because and just running into John Mish at Milwaukee, and we talked a little bit, and we were making the joke of a few of the spots that he's fished on Cedar with Jim, and he's like, yeah, the one spot's it's a known big fish area. And I told John, I was like, last summer the spot just far enough away from it but still adjacent, but not really considered the A spot, had 4 fish using it over 2 different weekends. One was close to 50 and a couple other upper 40s. And I don't see boats fishing that because it's separated by 100 yards, 150 yards. But for us, with knowledge of the lake, we would consider that just an extension of that spot. But yet there's just enough separation that a lot of people think, okay, we're done with this spot. And I think that goes back to what you're saying, Joe. Sometimes if the fish isn't where you expect it to be, they have to be somewhere close by. Maybe they made a big run to the opposite side of the lake. That's something we see on a few of our smaller lakes here, like Indian Lake Chain, Canyon Lake. If we get a wind switch from northwest to south, all of a sudden that fish might be on the opposite shoreline. And I don't think that enough people are willing to make that pivot, that change, that let's go try something that we're maybe not super comfortable with. And for us, and I'm going to segue into what I think is one of your calling card lures. You have a few, but when I think of you, I think of the shallow raider in various sizes. And when we think outside of the box, a lot of times it's crankbaits. And I do think, and like I said to you off air, it's a bit of a lost art. And I know talking with Tyler Andrews, he's a crankbait fanatic because of you. And I I don't fish it as much as I should. Dave probably fishes it more than I do in my boat, but where did that come from for you, Joe? And how is it that it became almost synonymous with you?
Well, what's really interesting is that, and I've said this to many anglers, I've said this to hundreds of anglers at Musky, especially at Musky shows over the years, is that um, if you expand your repertoire of tools, the more you can do that, the more situations you're going to be good at. And let's face it, in the muskie world, a lot of there's still, even this day, there's a lot of muskie anglers that are one or two lure people. That's just the way they fish. You know, it used to be like top water and a blade, top water and a blade, top water and a blade. That's all they ever do. So when they have success, it's like it's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah.
And yeah, but there's those days when that doesn't work, and then that's when you learn, and that's when you expand as an angler. Now my crankbait days go way back when I was way back to my teenage years as a bass angler. And when I was writing for Fishing Facts magazine, I was writing mostly walleye and bass articles back in the early days of my fishing career, and that's what I fished for. So when I first started doing this muskie thing, I was like, wait a minute. Everything I've read, everything I see in these stores, and everything's all related to blades, jerk baits, and topwater, and it's all shallow water bite thing. And I like to do that as much as the next guy, But once in a while, it doesn't work. And so I started, when I was guiding a lot, I would play around with crankbaits as kind of not only as an optional tool to kind of try stuff that the client, give the client the stuff that was, the traditional blade, top water, whatever. And today you would add rubber to that because a lot of guys are doing that.
Yep.
But I would use my crankbait as a forward-facing sonar.
Interesting.
If you read my crankbait book, I talk
Yep.
about a lot. Is that, and I've done this in videos. Is if you're standing on that bow and you throw a depth raider is like the ultimate tool for this, and you're trying to stay perfectly on a break line or a weed line, and your buddies or your clients or your buddies or whatever are fishing perpendicular over reefs and whatever, I would be fishing with my crankbait, much more of a parallel thing to try and feel out the weed edge or the break line, or, there's a little jut of rocks out here that nobody knows about. And this was the original forward-facing sonar was my depth raider. So I stand in front of the boat and, I'm not getting any weeds here. Oh, I'm getting weeds here. Throw a cast in between the two. It's like, just do very, getting a few weeds here and cast out here. Oh, I'm feeling some rocks out here sticking out beyond that weed line. I would learn the configuration of these spots by doing that, running my lure at a level that none of these other lures are running, and voila, occasionally scoring, especially scoring on the bigger fish.
Yeah.
And it's time.
Yeah.
Again, adding knowledge to understanding how these configuration of these spots go. What I have learned over time is that the crankbait whether you're fishing it shallow, deep, or anywhere in between, which by the way is an old Buck Perry line. The fish are shallow, deep, or somewhere in between. Which, yeah, it kind of sounds like overly simplified, but it's true, is that the crankbait enables you to catch the less active fish. You know, if you think about muskies in two terms, like you have these active chasing fish. Those are the fish that take top water. Those are the fish that, you know, are going to run down a blade, and you're fishing just over the shallow water. Over shallow spots, like a reef, for example. Most people come up to a reef that one guy's on top water, one guy's on a blade. A lot of times I will fish the crankbait because I want that. If that fish is not active, that fish is not going to come up and chase that bait. He's going to be laying tight. And then the crankbait's the only bait that's going to get at him. Now, in today's world, you know, a lot of guys are fishing plastic, you know, deep, the same way. Same concept, though.
Yeah.
It's getting that lure close, very close to a less active fish. And that's what crankbaits do for me a lot. And that's the way I fish them a lot. You know, a lot of my crankbait fishing is trying to, you know, collide with cover, learn what's out in front of me. It's my forward-facing sonar, you know, fish finder, spot finder. There's a part of that reef that's way out there that's not on this map. If I throw a blade, I don't know exactly where it's at. I'm just going to fling baits out there. If I throw a depth radar out there, I'm going to tick that spot.
Yeah.
And now I know exactly where it's at. And here's what I do a lot too: is I'll tick that part of the reef that nobody else is casting. There might have been 3 or 4 boats that came through there, but they don't even know that one piece of that reef is way out there. Okay, but I found it with my forward-facing sonar, my depth radar, or whatever crankbait I'm fishing,
Mm-hmm.
and I'll go. I'm just hypothetically saying, Glenn, throw your blade over there. Nobody's made a cast over in that spot, and if you didn't hit the crankbait, you throwing that blade over that spot, which you wouldn't have done otherwise, or a jerkbait, you know, scoring on a big fish, and it's like, wow, we wouldn't even have made a cast there. But the crankbait, you know, discovered where that spot was. And now that you discovered it, you know, today's world, waypoint,
Yep.
and you're going to fish the spot completely different. And now when you pull up to that spot, you know, you don't just drift over it and disregard that little point that's of high rocks that's way over there. Oh no, we're going to go way out here so we get it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's kind of how the concept of the crankbait thing started, and because I was doing live guiding, and then of course the same thing. It's like you're talking about picking off these suspended fish. Well, you're going to be throwing that crankbait over a lot of open water, and all of a sudden you're like, wait a minute, I got one out. What's going on out here? And you go over there and look at it and go, fish was over nothing. And then you find those are the early days of you know, the suspended musky frontier, where we looked at those spots and went, you know, there's nobody fishing for these fish. And now with forward-facing sonar and you know, all of the information that's available today, we talk about, you know, that's no longer a big secret. And trolling passes, you know, really reveal a lot of that kind of stuff, because you're just able to, because you're making circling passes and you know, getting to turn a boat around to make another pass at something. Quite often when you're making that turn and you're out over open water, the fish might have followed it out there, or you might have picked that fish up over open water as you were making your turn.
Yep. And oh my God, there's so much in that little piece you just said there, Joe, because we've taken so much of that philosophy. And one thing I can tell about a crank bait fisherman that comes up here, he might pull a crank out of his box, and if the front of it is not beat up, he's not making contact with the bottom,
Right.
and he's leaving fish on the table, so to speak.
Yep.
And a quick story, David's first 50, we were fishing a well-known reef on Eagle Lake. I was in the front of the boat. I don't even remember what I was fishing, and David was using a crankbait, and we had went through Kyla cast, I cast, David cast back at a slightly different angle. bang the rock, boom, he's on. And at first it didn't look like it was a big fish. And turns out it was a 50. And we cast probably a bucktail, maybe a dive and rise, something like that over top of it. But when he ticked that rock, that fish come up and grabbed it. And we've had a lot of success fishing that style too. And like I had said earlier, it's something we need to do more of. Again, we have so many tools at our disposal, but I like what you said about the search aspects of it, because I think that's something that a lot of today's anglers, we're trying to hit that spot on the spot on the spot, and we've lost that let's search around. And when you said you cast out the front of the boat, that really hit home with me, because I was guiding a few years ago when the Lake X toad just came out. We had a ton of success up here with it. And I asked my buddy Benny at the front, I said, just cast this toad straight out the front of the boat. I don't want you to cast ashore. And he was like, oh, this doesn't feel right. I'm like, just you trust me. We're hitting that vertical edge where the rock rubble meets that soft bottom. I want you to cast there. He picked up 3 fish that day doing just that. And to me, it's an extension of what you were just saying. We weren't trying to contact the bottom, but because we have, again, that knowledge of that area, we're using a lure almost as like that depth finder. We're trying to get it to a certain level. And it's obviously like we've learned this from guys like you, like Jim, like the guys we're talking about. And I feel that as I keep doing what we do, I want to share my experience with it, but still show that, you know what, we learned it from people and, before us. And I think that trying to express to our viewers that guys like you were doing it before us, and there's a reason why, we're still doing it. It works, but it's so easy. And I talk about power fishing a lot now and drifting away from stuff like your little dancing raider, which was one of my all-time favorite lures. I would call it a finesse lure because it's small and you can put it in just tiny little spaces. We've drifted away from finesse fishing because today's world is that grind, the power fishing and moving through spots. And we want to make a conscious effort of kind of getting back to, picking spots apart, but yet still looking at the broader picture. Where do you see it going from there, Joe? Because clearly the generation of the Musky Hunter crew was the pinnacle of that. See it, feel it, pick it apart on the water. Today's generation is definitely more, we're going to power fish and I only want to hit the spot on the spot. Like, where's that middle ground for you, Joe?
Well, I think one of the biggest things your listeners, if they want to, again, is to talk about taking your taking fishing to another level. And again, it doesn't even have to apply to musky fishing, but it definitely will apply to musky fishing. Is everybody's doing the same thing. When everybody's doing the same thing, if you add something else to what you're doing, you have a leg up. You all of a sudden you have a play to call that the other guys don't. Adding crankbait fishing to your repertoire gives you a huge leg up. Talking about fishing these finesse baits. When you're power fishing, for all the newer musky anglers that throwing big baits and running, gunning, moving fast, covering water, and you move fish, but you don't catch them. Those are all things you can, again, building knowledge, building information about where they are and what they're doing, where these fish, as we know, location is a huge thing. It's a huge thing with musky fishing. It's huge, which that way with just about every fish we fish for. But location is huge, and a lot of times muskies reveal themselves, but we don't score on them. But going back on that fish, that big 9-inch shallow raider that you showed, or if I raise that fish on a big 9, it's one of those things that the dude and I go, we've shown so many videos like it. We'll come back in an hour and hit him with a 5. Hit him with a little guy. Yeah, hit him with a little one. Hit him with, and if that fish came up on a top raider, big prop bait, you go back on him with that little dancing raider, it's not going to go right through there, or that if it does, that fish might hit it. The fish might follow it again. But a lot of times coming back on that fish, either follow right up with it, which we've had a lot of success with too, by the way. It's just, I probably got at least a dozen good videos on my YouTube channel about this. Is like downsizing and upsizing.
Yeah.
When to downsize, when to upsize. But this downsizing game, it really had it's come back. It has come back. Older folks like myself that can't go at it with the big baits as long as we used to have a tendency to do this more. But smaller spinner baits, smaller bucktails, whatever you're throwing and you're getting interest from fish on, if they don't score, if they don't strike, one of the best things you can do is just the same lure, give them a miniature version of it. Tell you one of the biggest success stories, one of the last years I filmed full time was this little rattle bait that we came out with, this JD Rattler. When we first were catching fish on it, people thought that we were kind of BSing them. It's like, you aren't really catching them on that thing. And we really are. And it was a downsizing thing. This JB Rattler that is, it's a 4-inch minnow bait that's built heavy duty with big hooks. It's a large rattle trap style lure.
Yep.
And 9 out of 10 musky guys probably don't even have one in their box. 99 out of 100 would never even think of throwing it. And yet, the last trip I took with Chaz on Lake of the Woods, the 3 biggest fish, I caught all 3 of them throwing that little JB Rattler. And then, one of them was leading, not even a cast back, but fishing it. The fish seemed to be preferring a small bait, and I was just doing the same thing we were just talking about. Feeling out the area with more of the 11, 12, 1 o'clock cast, while Chaz and Tyler were fishing perpendicular to the entire area with blades and with topwater, and I'm throwing that little JB Rattler, caught the fish of the trip on that little JB Rattler. So the thing is that musky anglers today have a tendency, especially young guys, have a tendency to completely avoid that style of lure. When that style of lure in cold fronts, heavy pressured fish, when you get away from the waters that you fish, and you fish these waters that are high tournament, high boat traffic bodies of water. I know dozens of guides in northern Wisconsin that they make a living with small baits. They make a living with, and Chazzy's one of them. Chazzy 500 Bucher tail and a JB Rattler and a 5-inch shallow reader count for, boy, I'll tell you what, probably 60% or better of his catches in a season, and they're great customer or friend baits. For an inexperienced angler, you can hand that bait to somebody and they can go and go and go and go and stay with you all day long. And I think that's one of the things is, some of our listeners that are on a trip with, let's say you're on a trip with grandpa, or somebody younger that, just physically can't go all day. You put them on a small bait when you're throwing the big stuff, and you're going to be surprised sometimes that they're going to score big time. They're going to score big.
Absolutely. We just did a video talking about the most underrated bucktails in musky fishing, and it was all those smaller baits.
Yep.
And like this little slot master is probably still is one of my wife's favorite baits. And if I don't have it in the boat when she comes, She's like, "Where's my slop master?"
The thought, man,
And it's a confidence bait for her. It works in a variety of different places. And I do think in modern musky fishing, we've gotten to the point where when you say we're going to throw a pounder all day, nobody even bats an eye anymore. It's just part of the lexicon of musky fishing. But there's something special about going back to those smaller baits. And I think, like your little JB Rattler, it's thinking outside the box. It's trying something different, because the boat that went through in front of you was probably throwing the same three things that the boat in front of them, and the one in the morning, and the one last night. And I think you have to be willing to try. And that's something like Dave and I do. We're willing to try some different things. Yeah, we have our core group of baits, but we're willing to at least experiment. And I think that watching guys like you, watching, some of the other guys are even on YouTube now, we can pick up something from everybody. When I see, say it's Chaz using something, or I see Tyler using something, or Doug Wagner's using something, or maybe it's Lee and Robbie on Today's Angler, we can pick up from all of these guys, like, hey, that's something interesting that might work on my home waters. And I just think being open and willing is important in today's musky fishing.
Oh, absolutely. And it just goes back to the same things we've talked about here on your whole program here is just, the more you learn, the more you realize what you don't know.
Yeah.
And it's sometimes these subtle little things that can make all the difference in the world. I'll tell you, one of the greatest pieces of advice I've often given musky anglers is that, the difference between success and failure in musky fishing, these fish that they're this close to your lure, but you didn't score on them, sometimes all it takes is a change in color or a change in size, more of a change in size.
Mm-hmm.
And that gap is gone. And now you got the fish on the end of your line. And I think one of the big success stories in growing as an angler is being able to recognize that. And you call it thinking outside the box, and that's good. It's been called a lot of different things over time, but I think it's just one of those things that, if you think back in our discussion, kind of as a summary, is that when I started Musky Hunter magazine, there wasn't a lot of this. There wasn't any of this kind of stuff being talked about. And, it was a small selection, a small handful of lures. It was a shallow water casting bite. It was the fish of 10,000 casts. And, knowledge and skills, and just an expanding informational base by so many different anglers doing so many different things. It has taught us, that the sky's the limit, to what you can do. And there's more frontiers to cross. But, I tell you, even in a closing our program, I think one of the big things to grow as an angler, one of the best things that your listeners can do is challenge yourself to use a lure. For example, just use a lure that you're not very good with. Use a lure you don't have a lot of confidence in with a friend, fishing the high percentage lure. And that's a tough thing to do.
Yep.
Because, you may not have the success right off the bat that you would otherwise. That's how I learned how to become a really good jig fisherman. And for bass and everything, fishing a lot of jigs. I wasn't very good with it. Now I'm really good with it. Whatever the lure is, whether it's a jerk bait or, if you broaden your perspective and if you got these lures sitting in your box that you're not very good at, think about this too. Pretty much every lure that's sold today, if we're just talking musky fishing, every lure that's sold today, somebody's had success with them. That's why they put forth the effort to build them and, design them and produce them and package them and stand in front of a booth at a show and try to promote them. And for the most part, somebody's probably caught fish on them. And even some of the stuff that you look at it and go, man, I don't know. really out there somewhere. It just doesn't look like it would catch anything. Somebody probably did. And if you challenge yourself and discipline yourself to learn a new lure group, a new genre, so to speak, same thing with guitar. One of the best things you can do is play stuff that you're not real comfortable with. And you play stuff you're not real comfortable with, well, guess what? Eventually you get better at it. And whether it's improving speed or it's improving string bending, or if it's, one of the ways I really learned jazz as a guitar player is I used to love the sound of it. And, sound of some of those jazz musicians, and, playing some of those techniques that rock guys and blues guys don't play. And you just go, I got to figure out how to do that. And I wasn't very good at it. But then I got a little bit better, and then I kept working at it till, by golly, I can incorporate that back into everything else I do. And it sounds pretty cool. And it enables me to go in some different directions. Same thing applies on the water. It's like, when I'm fishing with friends, like you're talking about fishing with Tyler and Chaz, on trips and whatever. I'm going to be doing a trip this summer with the Musky Mastery guys, and I've kind of turned it over to them now. I just go fishing with them now. I don't have to. I'm not in charge of everything anymore. It's great, but I'll just take chances. I don't really, because I know they're going to be fishing. Yep. Doing their thing, dude, over here, over there, and it's like, go ahead and do it. But more often than not, and Chaz knows, Chaz and his buddy Mike know that. I'll be doing some things that are a little bit different than they are, but all of a sudden, once in a while, I'm going to score, and vice versa. They're less apt to try some of that stuff yet than I will, but I don't really care. It's just one of those things that I will do. I'm doing that, by the way. I'm doing that down here with these big redfish, these really big bull reds that I'm catching down here. Those that follow me on my Facebook and Instagram pages and seeing these really big bull reds I'm catching, it's like most of these locals, they're not scoring on this class of fish. But guess what? They're not fishing for them.
Yeah,
they're fishing different. They're fishing the way everybody else fishes, and for the most part, that's a better way to fish, because they're going to be on big numbers of fish doing that, and they're going to fill their live wells doing that, which is great, by the way, for charter captains. And I'm not by no means am I belittling them. All I'm saying is that I tend to step outside the box because of age and some of the knowledge that I've gotten over the years. And I'm scoring on these big redfish, doing things that they making casts and trolling passes, but like trolling passes in general. Nobody on your trolls. So, I got a gold mine here, and but I run into these big fish in spots that nobody's ever making a cast or a trolling pass over them.
There's so much good advice there, Joe. And this talk has been incredible. I've found it incredibly insightful, and I'm sure our viewers will. And what you said about playing guitar, I would not be happy if I walked away from this without asking you about your music. And when we started a cover band up here a bunch of years ago, me and some of my buddies playing the local pubs and bars, etc., having to learn a country song, a modern pop song, a rock song, a classic rock song, and I'm an okay guitar player, but having to step outside of my comfort zone and learn all these different genres of music only made me better. And some of it's still not comfortable. I'm not comfortable with a country guitar solo, so to speak, but I will put the time in to learn it and try to do my best. So I think that's really important, and it ties right into musky fishing, just trying to do different stuff with different lures. But when you go to play Blues Fest, or you're going to play out, what is it that you play? Because I do see you with a Strat more often than not.
Yep. I have a big selection of guitars. But I tend to rely on a Strat because I can get, it's like my versatile instrument. When I'm in studio, I play all kinds of Les Pauls and Gibson 335s and some awesome acoustic stuff. But I tend to rely on, it's always sitting right alongside me.
Yep.
And so I'm a kind of a guitar buff, but when I have to rely on something, for what I want, somebody wants me. I was out to eat the other night and I had to step up on stage and play, and I was invited up on stage to play, and so I looked over there and the guy had 3 or 4 different guitars. He says, "You pick whatever you want." And I grabbed the Strat, and he said, "Can you play?" He says, "Can we play a little, a blues jam, a 1-4-5 blues jam and C?" And the guy goes, "Oh yeah, I can do that." And, so here I am.
So what is your amp of choice, or what do you play through the most?
I play totally. I had a great selection of stuff over the years. I mean, you can't imagine. I had 60s. I had 1960s and 70s Marshalls and black face Fenders and all kinds of stuff. You'd almost laugh. I play through a little digital amplifier that I program, and I can play. I mean, I've got a little Fender Mustang over here.
Yep.
That plays the most. Now, if you didn't know any better.
Oh, and most people wouldn't, Joe. And that's the beauty of modern technology.
It's awesome what they've done. And yeah. I can play. It sounds like I've had people write me almost daily saying, "Man, what is that old Fender? What do you got there? An old Fender Princeton Reverb, or how you getting that fantastic sound out of it?" It's just a cheap little $60 Fender Mustang one that I found at a pawn shop.
Well, I got an interesting story for you that I know you'll appreciate. But my buddy Derek posted here earlier a comment, and he's like, "How come we haven't got a Fender Joe Bucher custom called the Bucher Caster?" And I just thought that's perfect. And the fact that we see you always playing a Fender, every time I see you, there's a little piece of me that just smiles. And I also play a Strat. That was my main gig in guitar. And surprisingly, it was a made in Mexico Strat. I had a made in America Strat years ago that was good. It wasn't great. I picked up this made in Mexico Strat off of like a classified thing for like $350. It's just plays so good, doesn't go out of tune. I haven't hardly did anything to it. And it's just like my favorite Musky rod. I just reach for it every gig we played at. And years ago, I got a fella in, I believe it was New England, made me a hand-built and hand-wired 57 Tweed Deluxe clone 5E3 with an old Hammond organ speaker in it. It's absolutely amazing. And it's got that old squishy sound to it. You get it cranked up a little bit too much. It's almost flubby in the bass. And we played one of our local gigs here. It's called the Come Together concert at Christmas time. And we closed the night out and we played a bunch of different songs. I think we closed with a Tragically Hip song from famous Canadian band. And all the other musicians come up on stage at the end to kind of sing the last chorus. And the best compliment I ever got on our playing is hearing from fellow musicians that were like, "What are you playing through?" And that stuck with me. And it ties into what our whole discussion's been tonight, Joe. It's like, what did you catch that Musky on? People want to know when you have success. Like I said, I've truly appreciated this talk. And if you'll come back and be a guest again, I know my audience would love to have you. And I can't thank you enough. And if I could ask you one last question, what will the legacy be of Joe Bucher when you are not musky fishing?
When I'm not musky fishing, because I'm gone? You mean because I'm dead, or because I just stopped fishing?
Because you're not fishing for muskies and you've left that world behind you. What will the world see as the big thing that you left behind?
Well, I hope that what I left behind speaks for itself. That I tried to make a difference in this industry, and just help, to bring people into this industry. Number one, teach them how to do it so they could enjoy it. And when you have success, you stay at it. I think looking back, I hope that people's looking and go, man, this guy, he made a difference. He started a magazine. He had early, he was one of the first guys to do all these Musky videos, and he was doing all these seminars on this stuff years ago. And I just hope they look at it as I tried to make a difference. I'm trying to make a difference in the fishing, in fishing in general. And that I helped a lot of musky anglers become successful. And as I can see by some of the comments that are coming up, I inspired them to get into the sport. I'll tell you, as we're closing up here, I never tire of getting a letter or a comment like that, because I know I made that guy's day or that girl's day. I made a difference in their life by doing that. When I get a photo or a letter, from a video they've seen or an article that they read or something from my books. I saw a couple of different comments about people reading my my Crankbait Secrets book and stuff like that. It's like, that's why we do this, man. That's why we do it.
Yeah, I can't argue with any of that, Joe. When it's all said and done, the history of musky fishing is going to go through Musky Hunter magazine, and your name is going to be forever associated with the history and the foundation of modern musky fishing. I want to thank you for everything you've done, for the inspiration you've given us and the rest of us. And I continue, I want to be able to see you out there. I'm looking forward to what you're going to do with Chaz this summer. Keep being that inspiration for the next group of musky fishermen. Thank you so much from 54 Bus, Joe.
Thanks, Glenn. I appreciate the time, and I enjoyed it immensely. And God bless you. I'll look forward to talking with you again.
Thank you.